So this gets us into the most nuanced part of this discussion, and that is how we're utilizing ignition architecture here. It's not a traditional scale out, it's not a traditional IoT or hub and spoke architecture. We're utilizing what I'm calling the tag server here, and that holds all of your current tag state information so that when you're doing DevOps in any of these gateways, you can take them down for changes with a full separation of concerns without affecting the live tag state of the other systems. So with that, the tag server is kind of the single source of truth for the plant floor. It is this, in some cases, you could even call this the site level UNS right here. This is where the single source of truth for all current state data on the site is living right now. It happens to be in the OPC tag server of Ignition rather than MQTT, which is a nuance we'll get into later when we talk about the UNS broker and MQTT up here. But this is where all of our current state, especially around the site level ignition infrastructure, lives. And all of our other functions reference that data to get their state, to get their tags. And now we can start to get into the MES side, and we'll come back down the stack to SCADA here in a second. With that, talking about the Postgres databases over here, Timescale and Time Series Historian with Timescale or Timebase, which are funnily too close of names, so I'm going to mix them up all day long. So off of our tag server, which is our single source of truth for all of our current states, we're going right into our process historian. That process historian, it's all of our telemetry, our scalar data, it's all of your instrumentation readings, it's all of your in-flight just streamed telemetry. So that will be every time you get a new temperature reading, it's going to log it to that. Every time you get a new pressure, a spindle speed, an amperage, all of that's going right into that time series database, the historian, Timebase. And that is in here as a time series data store, as a stream of telemetry data. So because we're using our tag server here and we have Ignition, Timebase Historian's Ignition module will allow Ignition to view it as any other historical data source, whether it's the internal database. So this Ignition just sees this as another historian that Ignition has access to because we're using the Ignition module. If we weren't using Ignition, we could use the collector to get data from another OPC server or an MQTT broker. But in this case, we don't need a collector because we've got the module. So we're dumping it straight from Ignition into the database. And then off of here, in here, we also would probably include the Explorer, which would be a nice way to view and model and just kind of play ad hoc with the data outside of Ignition. So with that, we've got the tag server goes to the MES backend, and this is our MES database. Our MES database is built on Postgres and utilizes a lot of the functions of Timescale for compression, hypertables, partitioning, all of that stuff. And this isn't just streamed telemetry data, that's all in Timebase. So what we're using Timescale for is for proper compression on some of our event data, a lot more transactional looking events. So like a machine state change might be represented in both just by nature, but it'll never be different. This one will have all of your context. So as we're logging things, it has the context of, yes, it was this tag it came from, but this tag has this ID, name, and description. It was running this product in this moment, and it's all the extra state that's being logged with that event in a table, more of a tabular form. Yes, so that is the red versus blue namespace conversation we'll get to when we start talking about the enterprise layer. So with that, the bigger question to start with is what's the difference between MES Core and MES Custom on the local MES instance here? Because this is going to get a little bit more confusing once we start talking about the fact that there's a difference between the local on-premise MES and the enterprise MES. There's going to be a difference in those. So the MES Core is all of our core MES functions that we are trying to standardize on between sites or deployments. It is all of the red data in that namespace, but still in the blue area. And red and blue, all that depends on which frame you're looking at it from. So from an MES local side here, all of our agreed upon, every site has this function, is going to be in the core database. And the custom database is your ad hoc. We can just start adding stuff. We can play with tables, do what we need to do to solve our own problems on this site locally and with a level of agility that you can only do as the frontline worker. but it keeps that separation of all of our core functions can be version controlled and maintained over here, while you have the sandbox over here to build on top of. And that brings us to Flow Software, the actual software, not the company name, is our analytics framework here that is connected to our MES Custom, our MES Core, and our Timebase historian. And this is the engine that allows all of these disparate data sources, and on a real brownfield site, even more, all these different stovepipes to be brought together to have the timestamps made consistent, to contextualize that data, to model that data in a way that we can then calculate KPIs and do a lot of the functionality in a way that can be traced back and can be. So yeah, this has access to all of the data stores as well as the live data from the tag server, from the OPC connection to the Flow Software Analytics framework over here, the Unified Analytics Framework, as you'll hear them say. And then here we have the data coming back to us in our MES backend, where we can use it for MES functionality. I should probably make this a bidirectional arrow where it can go from here to the main tag server as well. So with that, the one we kind of glossed over here is your more traditional SCADA functions. So this is where you would have SCADA screens, operator interfaces, and much more plant-centric local operation screens. You may or may not have this in more of a discrete setting, but in a hybrid or a process situation, you're definitely going to have both. And one of the things here that I think separates us is we are using Vision for SCADA and Perspective for MES. So our SCADA screens being multi-monitor and local requirements. So Vision specifically, when we're talking about ignition, is running in Java, which might be a little bit too technical, but that gives us access to the underlying operating system that that client is running on. It's running scripts locally on that client and operating on that client. And that operating system access gives us access to things like serial ports, MAC addresses, unique identifiers, multi-screen support in a way that you just can't do with a browser. That makes traditional SCADA applications much easier and opens doors for things that just simply aren't possible. So if you've got a serial printer or a serial barcode scanner, things like that, you can do that much easier with Vision than you can Perspective. But on the flip side, with Perspective on the MES side of things, when you're looking at it in a browser, you don't want to have everybody installing a client on every machine. It's going to be on your office network. There's more security requirements. More people need access to it, especially if you start talking about remote connectivity and things like that as you have employees working from home or on the weekends. And this allows it to run in a browser. All of your functionality runs back on the back end versus the front end. And with that, you have the capabilities of the browser, you have the flexibility of the browser, and a lot of the built-in security of the browser. And that is that security and requirements of the browser are the double-edged sword that removes some of the functionality that you have in Vision when it comes to the operating system access. So all of our functionality is happening in the back end, and the front end is just for display purposes. Where SCADA is a little bit different. We're not writing to the MES core databases. We're not doing any writing to those functions. So we're getting our tag data, and we have access to read context from those databases so we can show things to the operators as needed on the plant floor. Yes, it would do it through tags. It would go through the back end and go through there. Separation of concerns, keep things clean. Yeah.